Welcome, everybody. I'm here to present the Model Lighting Ordinance, which was 5 years in the making, at least, and wanted to just show that it is a cooperation of the International Dark Sky Association, which is going to be the owner of the Model Lighting Ordinance, and it was a joint task force with the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America and International Dark Sky Association. We have got several members here that were on the task force that were developing it. Leo Smith and I was on, and Jim Benya, and Leslie Lipstein, who is the City and County of Denver planner, was also representing IDA. Representing the IES was Denis Leroy and Cheryl English, Eric Gibson, and I'm forgetting somebody.
Denise?
Oh, Naomi Miller.
Yeah.
Oh, and also Michael Medmansky was representing International Dark Sky Association. So together, we have been working over 5 years on this Model Lighting Ordinance. And creating something from the beginning has been an extreme challenge. There's several things that we realized in the whole process was that some of the existing standards with IES really were not cooperating well in what we wanted to do. And the main thing was with the classification system and how we classify luminaires. The supposedly full cutoff, semi-cutoff classifications were not working as well as we would hope. So what we had to do was to actually go backwards and recreate a document to take care of the classification system. And in this presentation, I will go over what that is. When we went through the board review, some of the boards of directors, which was IDA and IES, asked us what the criteria was used to develop basically how much light you needed in an area and what guidelines were being represented. This is kind of a mapping of IES guidelines that was used for the Model Lighting Ordinance. And just wanted to show you that there was something that we could point to in every single lighting zone to represent what the criteria would be. Lighting zone 0 is not there. That was something else we created during the Model Lighting Ordinance, realizing that we needed to have a lighting zone that encouraged no light at all. And if a light were on, then it's only on intermittent, which means if you have a light near an entry station for a trailhead, that if someone approached, the light went on, but when someone left, the light went off. So it's basically not expected to be energized during the course of the evening. So lighting zone 0, of course, there's no criteria because it's an intermittent type of light. The Model Lighting Ordinance, the big premise was to not only reduce the amount of excessive outdoor lighting, but also reduce sky glow. And the third thing was to reduce light trespass, which is that light in your neighbor's eye or in bothering your neighbor. It's a complaint light. There's other things that we also wanted to do was to really, for the first time, start looking at lighting zones where the most important thing in that zone was the biological effects on humans, plants, or flora and fauna. That if there were lighting zones where it was really important that plants and animals came in first, way above our nighttime enjoyment. And when I say that, that is walking around the streets at night or shopping. It's that type of activity that we needed to have lighting zones that could do that. Also, in this age of energy usage, wasting energy is a huge issue. And so we're looking at some way of reducing the energy usage through better lighting or more effective lighting. The Model Lighting Ordinance is designed to really help city planners and municipalities in looking at both their new lighting and their existing lighting. The existing lighting would happen again, in certain renovation periods. Every municipality is going to have a certain trigger point of when lighting needs to be redone. And those types of issues in the model lighting ordinance, we're making suggestions of when that may occur. But municipalities basically have their own trigger point for renovation. The good news about having Leslie Lipstein on our task force, she kept reminding us of what city planners were all about. And she said, don't write code language for us because we're all really specific. What we need in the model lighting ordinance is the technical information that has been kind of vetted through the technical societies and through the International Dark Sky Association. This was the important information, so you will see things in the code, like enforcement, that we go to be developed by the municipality, because we're not going to tell them how to enforce their own codes. We're just saying you need to have a section there. So in the model lighting ordinance, you will see a lot of reference, basically guiding the municipality through the process, but saying, we feel this is important. Please don't change the technical portion of the code. But there are other things that you are able to change, whatever. The model lighting ordinance basically is for all exterior lighting. We do have some exceptions there, which are pretty typical exceptions. Notice that street lighting was an exception in version 1. We have now put that as an optional code, or whether it's going to be a guideline in a municipality. Sometimes street lighting isn't governed by the planning department. It is done by Public Works. So we're not sure of where that particular ordinance would be actually in the city process. Whether it's in the code itself, or guidelines, or policy. It could be policy, but we decide to put that in. In the public comments, I would say the inclusion of street lighting was the #1 comment that we got, and we listened and we did do a provision for that, which is going, I mean, I'm personally very excited about that, to have street lighting in it. The controls and curfew is something else that we've put in to say that all lighting has to be controlled some way, and you have to reduce it by at least 30%. The 30% value is there specifically for high-intensity discharge sources that have a real problem in going much lower than that. You can go to 50%, but not all HID sources can be dimmed to that level. And we want to make sure that we allowed something where you could dim the lights and not just turn things off. Because what we've seen in California, when you say you have to turn off or at least go to half the power or half the lighting level, was that you get a checkerboard effect where people start turning off every other light. So we wanted to make sure that we had a way of just reducing lighting level without messing with the uniformity. Hopefully, this can be changed a lot, especially with the introduction of new light sources that are easy to dim, whether it's low Kelvin temperature, LED lighting, or induction lighting. And then with the metal halides being able to being reduced, and great dimmable ballasts are coming up. So we've got the different lighting zones, and I've highlighted the 3 lighting zones that we basically are calling the default lighting zones. Lighting zone 0 is basically no ambient light. And with lighting zone 0, if you have light, like I mentioned earlier, it should not be energized, throughout the night. Lighting zone 1 is going to be a default through lighting zone 3, and lighting zone 4 is not going to be a default. Lighting zone 0, we actually put in the user guide some information of where lighting zone 0 may be applied, which would be wilderness areas, parks and preserves, and undeveloped rural areas. The beauty of the lighting zones is that any community can decide what lighting zone that community is going to be. The lower the lighting zone, the stricter the requirements are going to be. A community could say, we are lighting zone 0. We don't want any light on at night or after a curfew time. They can choose to do that. Or a community could say, we are lighting zone 1, which means we want and respect really low light, very low glare, and so forth. But in the user guide, to help the communities, we have given some instances. For instance, lighting zone 1, and its recommended default zone. So if a community has no idea what they're doing, they could make a default zone for rural and low density residential areas, would be lighting zone 1. Lighting zone 2 is going to be the recommended default zone for light commercial business districts and high density or mixed use residential districts. So that's lighting zone 2. And it could be that an entire town could say, we are only lighting zone 2 or we're only lighting zone 1. You don't have to have multiple zones in your town to make it simple. So it could be as complicated as you want or as simple as you want. Lighting zone 3, which is moderately high ambient lighting, this is the default zone for large cities' business districts. It also would be the default zone for maybe car dealerships and high-end or retail that's going on all night long. Or you could definitely do a car dealership or a gas station in lighting zone 2. And we'll go through an example on how a gas station fits into lighting zone 2. Lighting zone 4 is not a default zone. And this is really important. You'll see a lot of high levels in lighting zone 4. We needed somewhere to put in Times Square in Las Vegas. It just had to go somewhere. And just in case they wanted to actually look at their lighting. Currently in California, through Title 24, their energy code, all their defaults in California are lighting zone 2 and 3, and that is based on population. Towns below 50,000 people are default to lighting zone 2, and cities over 50,000 are default to lighting zone 3. They have a provision that if any city wants to apply for lighting zone 4, at least a portion of it, they can go through that application. In the last 5 years, not one city has asked for lighting zone 4. So currently, California, there is no lighting zone 4. That's what we're saying. It's a very unique zone, and I suppose a lot of us are hoping that no one ever applies for lighting zone 4. These lighting zones have been really abused in some of the processes. If you look at different types of codes or, and I'll use the U.S. Green Building Council Site Credit 8 as an example, which supposedly is going to be exemplary lighting. Our firm is one of the reviewers for Site Credit 8. I would say 80% of the applications coming in say that they're lighting zone 4 so that they can get more light. What I'm excited about the model lighting ordinance, instead of designers and engineers trying to decide which lighting zone they're in, the communities are now going to dictate that and to do some planning. This is the Luminaire classification system, which I mentioned, TM15, which is the backlight, uplight, and glare. If you notice here, is that the uplight actually starts at below the horizontal. Okay? It's the old typical full cutoff luminaire system started at the horizontal. But we're actually dipping below because some of the evidence on the impact between 80 and 90 degrees on sky glow. If you look at the backlight, which is the B in the bug system, we're very, very interested in looking at the backlight low, which is the area that could be directly on the property line. and then the backlight medium and the backlight high, depending on the different amounts of light coming out of the zones. The uplight goes beyond what the typical full cutoff was, and it dips down to 80 degrees. And because of this, when you look at the different uplight ratings, you will notice that some of them are not U0, but even U1 because of the control of the 80 to 90 degrees. So looking at this is a real improvement, hopefully, over the older system. The glare is something that is brand new to the system, which was the older system just could not address. And so we were able to introduce a whole new metric to luminaires, and this is the glare, which is a backlight high and backlight very high. All of this information comes out of TM15, which is the IES document. Here's an example that we actually got from Luminaire, thank you, to show on how would you take a luminaire and classify it and to go through to look at the different amounts of light that comes out of a distribution. Please notice that it's not based on percentage of light anymore, it's based on absolute units. Okay? This is important because you could have the same fully shielded light that had a 1,000-watt lamp in it, and it may be bug 6 or 7, but that same fully shielded light with a very low wattage compact fluorescent could have a bug 0 rating. So it's no longer dependent on the shape of the luminaire, has everything to do about what type of light source is in it and how much light it's putting out. Here are the actual off-site limits that we have with the bug system in the model lighting ordinance. And if you look at lighting zone 0, we've got different means on where the lighting is depending on the property line. Remember, backlight has everything to do about proximity to the property line. If I'm right on the property line, we're going to put more limits on the light that comes out of the rear of the luminaire to go onto the adjacent property versus the light that is the usable light in front. But as that luminaire moves closer into the interior of the property line, or the property, there's going to be less limits on the backlight. To the point where if we're in the middle of the property, we may actually want light coming out from 2 directions, which would be a typical type 5 or a symmetrical distribution. So we need to be able to allow for symmetrical distributions with this. So note that the B values become more strict the closer you are to the property line. And the line right here is less than 0.5 mounting heights to the property line. And it's property oriented. Then if we look at this is the U value, which includes 80 to 90 degrees. And the U actually starts U0, U0, U1, U2, U3. It never gets above U3 because of the 80 to 90 degrees. And the G values, which are the glare values, actually are the only ones that map along with the lighting zones. So a G1 is in lighting zone 1. G3 is in lighting zone 3. And so it maps together. But the important thing here is to realize the further from the property line you are, the more we're going to allow backlight. And what we've noticed in a lot of these luminaires is that let's say that you meet the uplight very easily. Most of the time, it's the glare rating that is going to determine if you're allowed in a particular lighting zone. So we've got like a 3-check type of thing. You could have the best uplight with no uplight at all, but huge, high glare coming out near 80 degrees or between 70 and 80, and will blow the glare rating. So we're actually looking at limiting not only uplight, but the glare and the backlight in these different lighting zones. Pete Strasser put together these next few slides to kind of show some of the representative luminaires that will be allowed in different lighting zones. And he showed that the 250-watt full cutoff Cobra head would be allowed in lighting zone 3, 4, and 5. Now you notice the model lighting ordinance does not have lighting zone 5, but TM15 does. And so we say, no, we're stopping at lighting zone 4. But so this is just a crossover between the two documents. So basically, in lighting zone 3, which was what type of area? It's the larger cities type, commercial area, or where you've got the car dealerships, that the 250-watt full cutoff luminaire is now allowed in those type of areas. Where the 150-watt SAG luminaire, the old drop lens Cobra head, which is something that Leo kept saying, please, we've got to limit their use. The only place that that would be allowed, the 150-watt, would be in lighting zone 4. So essentially what is happening and what we're hoping for, that the unshielded wall packs, the barn lights, and the drop lens Cobra heads, which are, and of course, floodlights that are used for area lighting, will no longer be allowed in any lighting zone, except for maybe 4. And as Leo mentioned, or Pete did, at the barn light, which is at the very bottom, a lot of photometric data doesn't have information above 90 degrees. They just didn't photometer it. So what we're working with IES and with some of the photometric labs, that you can't get a bug rating if you don't have data above 90 degrees, to hopefully have a lot of the manufacturers rephotometer their luminaires. So this is something that we want the municipalities to watch very closely. And with information like this, that if someone comes through with a drop lens Cobra head 400 watt, they go, oh yeah, it's great for lighting zone 2. And they'll have little sheets like this that they'll instantly go, no, something's wrong here. You know, I know that that higher wattage is not going to work in it. And to develop some kind of really simple checks for the planning department so that they know that barn lights, or if someone says can't get a bug rating, there's a good reason for it. So, again, thanks to Pete, he actually went through some of the typical full cutoff luminaires and some of the restrictions that we may have on them. In lighting zone 0, if you're near the property line, again, backlight's important, it appears as if you need a full cutoff 26-watt compact fluorescent would be the greatest amount of light that you could use in that situation. If you're away from the property line or more in the middle of the property line, you could go with a little higher wattage. And it's the backlight that is kicking it out in this, not the uplight or the glare. Typical luminaires for lighting zone 2. Notice again, these are all full cutoff luminaires, but they are now limited by the glare and the backlight. In lighting zone 3, this is downtown, high commercial areas. Here are some luminaires that would be allowed in lighting zone 3, but with excellent control. Something else that Pete saw was happening is that more and more manufacturers are being able to produce the bug ratings. There's a lot of lighting programs out there that's easy for you to take photometric data and produce your own bug rating too in all the luminaires. But for the first time, you no longer can say, oh, it's a generic luminaire. The bug ratings are now specific on what type of lamp you have in it because of the amount of light, and it's based on absolute lumens and not percentage. Offsite impacts. Another option, which is only available in the performance method, is going to be taking the amount of lumens in the site, and we kind of draw this box around the site, and the amount of lumens, and you can't have any more than 10% of the lumens that you're producing on the site, hitting the site either direct or reflected off the ground, that leaves the site at all. And then we also have, for off-site impacts, line of sight maximum illuminance. So you don't want a floodlight, one floodlight on the site that is aimed right at someone's window and says, well, I'm 10% of the lumens aren't leaving the site, and yet that floodlight is aiming at a window. So it's kind of a double check of amount of light that's contributing to sky glow plus a maximum amount of light that's leaving the site. So that's kind of the second option in the off-site impacts. With this, we actually have a maximum line of sight illuminance. The reason why we call TV illuminance, and a lot of people have asked, what does that mean? Standard lighting programs have that option. It's kind of something that you click, and it's called TV illuminance. And basically was designed for sports lighting, where if a TV camera wanted to see how much light was available to see a player on the field, and they could aim at anything. So what you do is you take your TV illuminance and you aim straight at the light. You see what the offending light is, and that's how you calculate it. But it's already available in the computer programs, and that's why that word TV illuminance, just to make that blend between them. So that's kind of the off-site impacts. Now I'm going to go through two different ways that you can comply with the model lighting ordinance, and also show how the off-site impacts are addressed in both of those. So I'm going to go over the off-site impacts again in particular. We've got the prescriptive method, which I would probably say is going to be 99.9% of the applications will be prescriptive method. We want to make this very simple. We heard last time during our version 1 that the prescriptive method was too complicated. So we backed way off on the prescriptive method and have made it easier with it. The performance method is for the areas that the city planners are throwing up their arms and going, oh, we just hope that it's going to work. This is going to be for the sports field, the outdoor retail, the monument that is being, uplighting, or the big, huge facade downtown. The performance method is going to be basically when everything else fails and you can't meet it through the prescriptive method. But we wanted to at least have an option there for that. So in prescriptive method, there's two different things you have to do. One is your total site lumen limit. This is to prevent overlighting. You only get so much light on the site, period. Second thing, your luminaires have to meet the bug rating per lighting zone. Okay, so those are the two different methods of doing it. And within the prescriptive method, we've got a very simple method for the mom and pops, little grocery stores, for the areas with a few parking spaces, and they're not going to go through a huge city planning effort. This is the simple parking space method, 10 spaces or less. You basically count up your number of parking spaces and you multiply it by how many lumens per space. Now I want to back up. These lumens that I keep talking about is a unit of light. That is what the light bulb puts out, or the lamp puts out. You can see it on the packaging. We figured that this is very easy for city planners to use. It doesn't involve any calculations. You basically take your initial lamp lumens, what it's going to put out the day you turn it on, and count those up, and then that's how many lumens you get per space. So this is a very simple thing. Inspector can go out on site, look at the light bulbs, see the packaging, or get a counting of what the initial lumens are, add them up, and see if it complies. The hardscape method, which is probably going to be the most popular method, basically says you get so much light per square foot. of your space, similar to lumens per acre, which I know some communities have been using. But this, we're limiting it to your hardscape, which is going to be parking lots, walkways, plazas, anything that has a finished hardscape. Even like a gravel sidewalk or a gravel path would be a hardscape. You get so many lumens per square foot per hardscape. Here's an example of how you would calculate your hardscape. You've got in the gray, or the kind of the putrid green area is going to be your square foot area. And if you've got a place that is wider than 10 feet, which is represented in the blue, you cannot count that, okay? That allows for large islands or landscape area. You can't count your landscape area. But if you have little medians that are going into the parking lot, yeah, count that if it's less than 10 feet. This is very similar to what the planning departments already do for drainage calcs, and they ask for the square footage of hardscape areas. So we're trying to use something, information that planning departments are used to gathering and using that. Notice it's not distinguished between driveways, sidewalks, parking lot. It is just hardscape area. We also haven't looked at facades. We haven't done anything. All your lighting, all your lumens have to fit in within this lumens per square foot to be as simple as possible. We're going to, if you could hold questions to later, write them down, and we'll go back to any slide, okay? Because we're doing this live. So this is a prescriptive method example on how to do it. Basically, this is what the designer will put in for the compliance chart. This is what your type of lighting is, what the quantity is, what your initial lamp lumens are per luminaire. And so you would look up in the catalog of a 70-watt metal halide and see that the lamp initial lumens is 5,600 lumens. And you would go through with all of your different types of lamps and select what the initial lamp lumens are. One thing we noticed from version 1 model lighting ordinance to version 2 model lighting ordinance, the incoming LED invasion. We kind of ignored LEDs, or we said, well, they're not going to be as important as we thought, but they are. And you have to realize LEDs do not have lamp lumens. How they are designed is that you put LEDs in a fixture and you photometer it, and it's a fixture lumens or a luminaire lumens. That's how LEDs are now done. Well, that would advantage them tremendously if we did not put in an adjustment factor for that. Because all the other lamps are put inside of a luminaire, and there's losses inside that luminaire, and so therefore, a typical lamp like a 150-watt metal halide gets only so much light that it can be used out of the luminaire, but the LEDs get to use it all. And so what we've done is put an adjustment factor that if you have LED lighting, you have to multiply your initial lamp lumens by 1.4. And that's kind of assuming that there is a 70% efficiency, typical efficiency on most luminaires. And it all seemed to be at least fair enough that LEDs are multiplied, so their adjusted lumens are higher than the typical lamp. So basically what we've shown is in the maximum allowed lumens, we know that we're lighting zone 2, that our hardscape area is 100,000 square feet. We go to table B, we look up for lighting zone 2 on how much light we're allowed per square foot. We get 4 lumens, and it comes up with the site allowed total lumens of 400,000. Now we compare that to what our design is, and our design is 360,752. So yes, we are in compliance with lighting zone 2, this particular site. So that's a prescriptive method. It's just so much light per site, but you do have to meet the bug rating. Okay, so your luminaires, you've got two choices. So much light, but then your luminaires have to meet that bug rating for lighting zone 2, every single luminaire. So it's a double guess. That's going to be what I just described most of the submittals for the planning department. Now I'm going to go through those unusual sites, which is the performance method. In the performance method, we have more things that you can apply. For those of you who did a review of version 1, you'll notice that this used to be the complete site method in the prescriptive method. We have now moved it to the performance method. And what we have here is for the different lighting zones, you get so much light to begin with, then you get so much light per square foot, and then you get so much light per linear feet of the site. So the hardscape area looks exactly like the prescriptive method did before, and now we're adding the linear perimeter as shown in the purple all the way around the site. And you start adding up these different lumens. This is a lot more complicated, and again, it's for the real special sites. You also get additional lumens depending on what you are. This is how we're going to try and help the planning department look at car dealerships, senior centers, fire stations, places that say for some reason they need more light. And so we've got a whole bunch of allowances depending on what they are. This is in Table E, and you feel that Table E goes on and on and on. In the model lighting ordinance is basically trying to anticipate every unique type of situation. These also are use it or lose it. If you don't have this situation, you can't trade it among all the others. Where the first table is tradable, just like the prescriptive. This is how much light you have. You can use it anywhere on the site. These, you cannot. You can only use it where you've got this situation. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's just more of Table E, and they're non-tradable lumens. So here's an example using the performance method for a gas station in lighting zone 2. I figured I used a gas station because there's going to be gas stations in every single situation. Every town, whether you're lighting zone 1 or lighting zone 3 town, you're going to have a gas station. So I picked lighting zone 2, and to go through the issue of the design and kind of what we discovered in working through this design. So we have a gas station, and we notice that the C lights are actually the pole lights. The D lights are the canopy lights. The B lights are some wall sconces, and A are just some different lights over the entry. All of these lights are full cutoff, except for the B lights, which are just cutoff wall packs. You go through and you decide what the type of lights you have, what the different descriptions are, the type of lamp, the initial lumens. If we have LEDs, I need to do that adjustment factor, and then the mounting, and then the luminaire watts. We're just kind of adding it all together, kind of a little luminaire schedule. And here's how we calculate the hardscape, again, with the perimeter method, or the performance method. The hardscape area is in the green. It's the single hatch going across. We also have to calculate the canopy, because we've got certain lumens we are allowed under the canopy, and then the perimeter going around. And then identify the different building entrances with the property line. The tough thing about gas stations, they usually are so close to another establishment. At their property line, is really close. And you typically want to pull really right next to the property line. So as we go through this, you'll find how hard it is to light a gas station in lighting zone 2 with really tight property lines. Here's the worksheet that you would fill out. Everything in red is what the designer or the engineer will need to fill out. Basically, you start at the vehicle service station. We're in lighting zone 2. Hardscape area, we calculate all the paved surface of the site. We've got the canopy area, and then we've got the hardscape perimeter and the number of entrances. So that's kind of your data you need to fill in with this particular one. Then you've got total lumen allowance, and this is per table D per lighting zone. And total lumens per square foot. This is this tradable area that is similar to the prescriptive area. Lumens per square foot, initial lumen allowance, and then lumens per linear foot. So these, table D is all tradable. This is your normal stuff. Then table E is the extra stuff because you happen to be a gas station. You get so many lumens per building entry. You get so many lumens underneath the canopy. In addition, it's a layered approach. The first layer is table D, second layer on top of it is table E, and so many lumens per canopy, and then the hardscape. And so you go through this and actually start calculating what your initial lumen allowance is. The right-hand column, one of the reviewers actually called it kind of like a tax form, you know, where you go add lines A and B and C and whatever, so that you would absolutely have no way that you could mess up. Again, red is what is inputted, all the black is calculated automatically, you know, on a spreadsheet. And then you would come up with your total lumen allowance, which is 503,371 lumens allowed for this site. So that's step 1. Step 2 is what? It's the off-site lumen limit, okay? Step 1 is how much light on the site. Step 2 is how much light is leaving the site. So, went through and looked at, again, is it compliant? Yes, only for step 1, which is how much light is on the site. Step 2, you have 2 different ways of doing it. You can go back to the bug ratings, which is simple. All the luminaires on site have to meet the bug ratings for line zone 2. Very simple to do. And we looked at all of these and what the bug ratings were. And if you look at table 5, the bottom one, everything in 3 or in red means it does not pass the bug ratings. So even though we had not too much light being lit, and by the way, this gas station is only lit to 20-foot candles average. Okay? It's not a huge lighting gas station. But because of the selection of the equipment, that they do not meet the bug ratings, and a lot has to do with the pole lights, which is in red. Why? Because they're too close to the property line. The backlight was too restrictive on it. Okay? And then some of the uplights we had some problems with too. So, gotta go back, gotta redesign, you know. If we can't make it, beat it, we're gonna go back and redesign. What we had to do was lower the wattage of the pole lights from a 250 watt to 150 watt. Maybe put in some house side shielding to try and reduce it. We had to reduce the number of other lights in order to comply. And then all of a sudden we were able to, notice that our lumens dropped, total site lumens dropped, but we're still within that 503,000 lumens, so that's not a problem. But all of a sudden the bug ratings now comply. So that kind of goes through on how you have to redesign a site. Well, there's another method of calculating off-site limits, and that is the direct line of sight. Remember I said so much light can't hit this box over the site. It's like a maximum light. So we went through and looked at that. And turned out that our maximum line of sight was the red 1.6 foot candles. All that is allowed is 0.3 foot candles. So it did not pass the maximum line of sight. And what was surprising, it had nothing to do with the light coming from the luminaires. It had everything to do with the light reflecting underneath the canopy and going up. Okay? So all of a sudden we're going, and in the model lighting ordinance, this is something I would love some feedback on, that in our direct line of sight, should we include reflected light or not? Okay, so this is a big discovery that reflected light didn't seem significant. So we kept thinking it was going to be floodlights going up along a facade of a building, whatever. We never thought about reflected light off of a canopy lit to 20-foot candles or higher. So this is something I would love some feedback in the public review and for you all to go through it and see what you've got. But that was a startling thing. It met the bug ratings, but it could not meet the line of sight. We reran it without reflected light, and it met it. It met the 0.3, but it could not do it with reflected light in the calculations. And we also looked at, remember, 10% of the lumens can leave the site. We had 27,000 lumens, and the total site was 50,000, so the total lumens inside the boundary that we would be allowed is 50,000, but by calculation, the computer calculated 27,000 lumens were leaving the site. So we did meet that 10% limit because we had up to 50,000 to do it. Too high. Okay, now I'm going to go to residential lighting, which is another option. And this is basically, has nothing to do with total lumens or anything. It's based on specific equipment only. And so what we've got is that we have maximum allowed luminaire lumens for unshielded luminaires at one entry only, which would be probably your front porch. Thinking a lot of people still have a glowy something at the front porch, and so we're going to allow that, but you'll see how strict it will be depending on what area you're in. Then you've got other areas, and I'm going to go through an example and kind of go through each of these specifically. So here's my house. I've got luminaires at the front porch, which is luminaire A, and I've got a fully shielded over the garage, which is luminaire B. I've got a small wall sconce in the back entry, then I've got a shed with a light, and then a little post top light at on the driveway. So this is my little luminaire. Little house design. I'm going to be in lighting zone 1 because single family house should be in lighting zone 1 or 0. And I look at my front entry light. I've got a 9-watt compact fluorescent which produces 600 lumens, and that's all I'm allowed for my glowy thing is a 9-watt compact fluorescent or equivalent, whatever the incandescent equivalent of that would be. That's it. And it meets it. Next one, I've got the light over the garage, which is a 23-watt compact fluorescent, fully shielded. All of these are, well, the 1800 ones have to be fully shielded. Okay, otherwise they're not allowed this much lumens. 1800 watts. My 23-watt compact fluorescent is 1500 watts, so I meet it with that. Then I've got that light at the back entry, and that is a 7-watt compact fluorescent, which produces 400 initial lumens. And yes, that meets it too, at 450 is the allowance. And then all my other lights are fully shielded, and they're within the 1800 lumen limit. So this particular design does meet it in lighting zone 1. Street lighting option. This was what we added as an option for municipalities, like I mentioned earlier. And basically, it's saying you need a master plan for street lighting. Where this is important is what street is in what lighting zone. Okay? This is really important for the municipality to go, oh yeah, we're lighting zone 1, but we're going to run a huge commercial street collector right down the middle. Warranting, this is what Leo really pushed. Do you need street lights or not? And so there is a huge discussion in there about warranting to first thing in your master plan say, you've got street lights, but do you really need them at all? And then we also talk about turning lights off or decreasing them during curfews. Again, that would be adaptive standards, which is a method of decreasing lighting level over the course of the evening. Or even seasonal effect. If you have snow on the ground, you may not need as much light. There is basically what it says for a street lighting option. There will be no light emitted above 90 degrees. Okay? That's the default. No light emitted above 90 degrees, which is similar to the full cutoff luminaire. People may ask, well, why didn't you use a bug rating here? We wanted to not restrict how you light the streets, because then we would get into a whole nother arena with AASHTO and the Roadway Lighting Committee, all of that. You can light a street perfectly with a full cutoff luminaire. So that's the only deviation from the bug rating. We're saying 0 light above 90 degrees. We have an exception for decorative street lights, but it has to go through a special permit only, which means the public gets involved in the process, and they come to the hearings and all of that. With that, we are now just following the uplight ratings across the board. Lighting zone 0, you have a U0 rating. Lighting zone 1, a U1. So it's right down the way, and all we're regulating is the uplight for the decorative luminaires. So that's the end of the formal presentation, model lighting ordinance. Now I know that people online may have questions. Are you going to be monitoring that? Or there's some, I know Kelly, you had a question. And please use a microphone because so that people on the webinar can actually hear the question.
Okay, so one of the things that I noticed, like the street lighting option, the special permit, and some of the like the parking lot prescriptive method. In the higher lighting zones, you allow, in those, this is parking the lumen caps, you allow, say, the illumination of a parking space to be higher, more lumens on the pavement in a LZ3 over an LZ2. I guess my question is, one of the things I'm trying to understand about your approach to this is, if a certain amount of lighting is adequate for LZ2, for a parking lot, why isn't that being adopted for LZ3 and LZ4 too? I think I know what the answer is, but to counteract what I think the answer is, I mean, if you're in an urban environment already, you've already got some ambient light helping you illuminate that parking space. So why add, in a sense, insult to injury by allowing the parking lot lighting levels to be higher in urban settings?
That's an excellent question. And I think it goes back to the recommended practices of IES, that there's many different flavors and ways you can light a parking lot. Many of the recommended practices understand that there are different ambient circumstances for different lighting situations. That a hospital parking lot may have higher lighting level, or a big box parking lot may have a higher lighting level than an office park or a church parking lot. The Illuminating Engineering Society talks about different ambient levels and also on pedestrian activity in the parking lot. They do vary the parking lot levels depending on what the use is and where it's located. We followed that in that first chart I showed you on the mapping of all of the different recommended practices. Basically went through and showed that parking lot lighting levels did vary in the recommended practices. In reality, is that important or not? To get the model lighting ordinance out, we did not really want to fight that battle. That goes more towards the application committees of the IES to look at it. And I think that the biggest hurdle will be the retail mall parking lot applications, which are now being lit to a minimum of 3 to 5 foot candles. Okay, well, at least we're doing, we're saying you no longer can do that. You're going to be a lot lower than that, you know, where your minimum is going to be more important, towards 0.6 foot candles instead of 3 to 5. So we're making baby steps in that direction, but that's an excellent question. Is another question coming?
Yes, I've got several questions, but I think the most burning right now, first, I really like this idea that we're now saying the community should have some autonomy in this, be able to decide what they want their community to be zoned as. My concern, though, if you think in ecological buffer zone framework, where you have, if you had a biosphere reserve, for example, similar idea, that if you have someone that wanted to be a zone 1, for instance, so you've got this community as a zone 1, and an adjacent community may want to be a 3 or a 4. And as we know, light pollution is a negative externality in the account that can affect up to 200 miles away from the source. So I'm wondering, when we're asking a community, or a community says, hey, this is what we want to do, how much education do those surrounding communities have? You know, do they realize, okay, this, I may have lighting, but I'm not really safe, or do we know what their motivations are at the time, and do we know, do they have enough information to make an informed decision? Because I'm thinking right now they don't. So to that end, to what extent is IDA going to continue to educate about light pollution in regard to choosing the zone? So.
I would say that's the number one challenge for IDA and for every one of you, is to go out and really educate the communities in not being overzealous in the zone that they select. And that's why I think we want to put in the user guide some defaults to say lighting zone 4 is really not a default anymore. And again, large cities versus small communities, and to go through the different lighting zones. I'm sure IDA, and I'm looking at our pres, will definitely be coming up with some education material for these types of lighting zones. I think going to the American Planning Association and talking with planners, working with them. How do you do this? Also notice that we didn't have anything on signs in here, and that's a whole nother ordinance that we have to address immediately, our signs and the brightness of the signs. I know Deb and I and Terry have been looking at that on what is the allowable brightness of different signs. So there's huge education with the American Planning Association, with planners, on educating them. And this is just the beginning for people who really know what they're talking about to introduce a model lighting ordinance. Now we need to go through like a day-long course on what does it mean, with lots of examples. I think the more examples we can give the planners, more sheets that will help them in what lumen limits are. I mean, Chris Lingenbuehl, that lamp chart that he has on the website, I refer to that all the time. He's got initial lumens and mean lumens and all that. I love that chart. And so maybe make that available to all the planners too.
And I'll add a final comment to my concerns. One thing that I'm working on is empirical research. research to go along with the anecdotal information that we have floating out there. When you take information to a planning board, they are, of course, the people who will eventually write that policy in or not. But then the community members themselves also need voice in that, and they need information that has some basis to it, rather than someone saying, well, this is going to make this difference for you. So I think as we move forward, there definitely needs to be more emphasis put on defendable information, something that has some teeth to it, for policy writers, for community members, and for our own efforts in creating lighting ordinances.
It sounds like you're going to be an excellent resource with that. Yeah.
Be happy to help.
Another question.
Hi, yeah, in the United Kingdom, lighting schemes are frequently designed to take on board the fact that lamps fade over some time by about 30%. So there is a danger that if you actually end up with a lighting scheme that's designed at that faded value, so in other words about 70% of total new light output, then you could end up with a lighting scheme that's effectively overlighting by about 30%. Does this actually take on board the fact that lamps do fade? And the actual lumens that are actually being given out, according to these particular charts here, are what should be actually illuminated. Well, really what I'm saying is, does it actually take on board fading?
Another excellent question. Yes, the lighting, how many lumens that are allowed initial, do take into account that the criteria you are designing towards has to have what we call a light loss factor, which is lumen depreciation and also dirt depreciation. In order to meet the recommended practices that I listed in the chart 1, basically, yes, the lumens allowed do take that into account. Though we are encouraging people not to overlight and maybe to dim the lights down to the design level so that things aren't overlighted. And I think, again, with the newer light sources with dimming capability, that this will definitely improve it. But yes, it is designed to meet the maintained lumens. The reason why we did not use maintained lumens in the calculations, there are too many ways of cheating the system. Light loss factor is, I would say, the #1 way that when a planning department asks for a point-by-point chart, light loss factor can vary anywhere in it. And we have seen light loss factors grossly underestimated or overestimated, like light loss factor of 0.4. And here's the point-by-point lumen. And the poor planning department's going, oh yeah, this meets it on everything. So we decided that light loss factors are now going to be 1. For this, that's why we selected initial lamp lumens. And that's another education to really show, here's this lamp. If they say here's the lumens and it's a mean lumens and not initial lamp lumens, here's what you should be looking for. Or even a community handing out a typical lumen chart that everyone is working from the same one. Again, going back to the one that's published on the web is excellent.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to say thanks to you guys for doing this. This is a lot of work. It's had an unofficial start, if I can remember right. They hit us up in Denver back in 2002. That's not what they started this, but that's some of the precursors to that. And I'd like to say thanks to everybody that's worked on this. Thank you guys. My question is, when do we have a tangible document in our hands?
When?
Yeah.
We are going through a public review process that started 3 days ago. It's going for 60 days, which is kind of a request of a lot of the IDA members. IES did not ask, or request a review period. Plus, IDA is really handling the review period. So once that happens, we will be getting the comments weekly. IDA is going to be sending the comments to actually Leo and me weekly on Fridays. Leo is going to be putting the comments in the appropriate section so that when a comment comes in, because we saw that version 1, a lot of comments were the same, so Leo went through and put all the comments in, which was on the IDA website, so you could kind of see where everything is. We'll be doing that weekly instead of at the very end. And then once that's done, I will be saying to the task force, so we can start seeing if there's a big issue right away. I want to know about it. So we can start looking at things. There's 2 big issues that came out during the board reviews already, or I should say one of mine is this reflected light, doing the line of sight, going, oh, what should we do with it? The other thing, one of the IES board members actually thinks that our lumens allowed for car dealerships is way too high. And that was one of the comments. And so we basically are taking the board comments and inserting them into the public review comments. And we will be re-looking at that too and doing more calculations to see if that is true. And again, what we're noticing, everyone thinks that it's the lumens allowances that are driving it. We're finding out it's not. It's the off-site lumen limit. In other words, controlling the light. If you're putting that much light out, you've got to have unbelievable good luminaires to control it. That the lumen allowance isn't as critical as we thought. That is definitely going to be the off-site lumen limit. That's the issue. But thank you. Other questions? Chris Walker?
Nancy, thanks for all the work you've done. We all know the world now is run by people that write software. Average age 18. I recently went through a tax review, and I 3 sets of accountants that were squabbling about some provision of the Internal Revenue Code, and the answer was to crank up 3 software programs that did tax calculations and find out what the software writers thought, and that's the way it was decided. So my question to you is, to what extent are bug ratings going to get into IES files and then get into the planning software like AGI 32? Because isn't that the way that in the final analysis people are doing roadway lighting, doing parking lot lighting, doing things like that? And it seems like if you can get the software guys to put it in the package so that the lazy people out there designing applications, which is 95% of us, not you perhaps, they'll find it very easy and you'll get a very rapid adaptation of all the work that you've done.
The software people are already all over it. You can get bug ratings on any luminaire as long as it has photometric data. If it doesn't have photometric data, or like what we are noticing, I mentioned that it never was tested above 90 degrees.
Should this, or can it be, or is it being made part of a standard IES file?
I'm going to, JF, do you know if it's part of a standard IES file? You use the microphone.
I don't know precisely if it's part of IES file. I don't think so, and I think that's precisely because when you do the design, the computer program will tell you you're using that luminaire. It's that bug rating, because it's so length sensitive, it becomes pretty difficult to have a bug rating per luminaire. So I think that the industry is still battling with that. It's an event. A bug rating is like an event. You put that lamp into that luminaire, you get that bug rating. So for manufacturers, sometimes it's not like you do an incandescent, you come back fluorescent, or you do an incandescent, you do whatever. You don't know exactly what the lamp's going to end up being luminaire, so it's a little tricky. And I think we've been to tackle that issue. So it's the AGI, and really AGI, I'm sure, is considering putting it in. Private manufacturers have bug ratings programmed, because we need to bug rate our luminaires, so it's there, it's going to happen. As soon as it's a law, it's going to happen.
AGI photometric toolbox, you can definitely get bug ratings.
Well, if that's the answer, then the bug rating should go for a particular combination of a luminaire and a lamp.
Yes, and they do.
And they do. And
They do.
It seems like once you have that, Nancy, then you will have done a really wonderful thing, because all of a sudden now it's part of every calculation that people do. Because I imagine almost everybody uses some type of software when they do an application. And then the other thing that, of course, we like the software guys do is to simulate the appearance of an application at night, so that you can compare a glary fixture with a non-glary fixture just by looking at it on a computer screen. And that tells you probably what they really need to know. They can tell the city council or the planning commission or whoever's going to have to enforce this. But look at how much better it is with the new standards and the old standards, or the new standards versus what we have, or the new standards versus because everyone has a revamping program at some point. So I think you've done a wonderful thing, and if we can get this into the software, I think you find very rapid adaptation for what looks like a fairly complicated, hard to understand process. So.
Well, thank you. Yes, and what I've shown you would be the language that the programmers would need to program in. I mean, the performance method looks daunting. But yet I'm trying to think of how are communities currently dealing with difficult sites. And I'll use sports fields as the best example. Aimable lights. How do you do it? And, hopefully maximum illuminance leaving the site of that glass box around the sports field, and also no more than 10% of the allowable lumens going up. So that this will give the communities a method of at least asking for this method of compliance. But yes, I mean, anytime you introduce something new, it's going to take tremendous training, to get people comfortable. And what I'm hoping is that we could get some funding to actually come up with a lot of different examples, almost like a book to go, if this happens in your community, in your lighting zone 1, here's how step through and how to do it. Just so that they have something to compare with, just similar to what I do at the gas station and the residential. It'd be nice to develop a booklet of these to help the planning department feel more comfortable with what's going on. If nothing else, to look at the abuse in somebody not giving a correct submittal. That's the main thing, to get them more comfortable with the line of limits.
What you've done is a very nice solution to a hard problem. The really harder problem is the whole warranting issue, which is when you put these fixtures up at all, and that's actually a more difficult question. And street lighting and signage is another area where there's a lot to be done that nobody's gotten into.
Right.
All the lighting ordinances I've looked at, and of course lots of them are really pretty bad.
Yeah.
As we know.
So,
We actually have one more question.
okay, question on? Yeah, we have a question online that.
Online, and I hope you know what this means.
Is it contemplated that the applicant or the designer is still responsible for the minimum HFC or VFC in the IESRPs independent of the MLO? How is this expressed in an ordinance, and do you see liability issues here?
Okay, I think they're talking about, and I'm just going to look at the question right
Absolutely.
now. Horizontal foot candles and vertical horizontal foot candles. Yes. The designer, one thing about lighting ordinances, it's very important that a community makes two decisions. One is, are you only going to regulate bad lighting or impact on other people? Now, we really don't care what you do in your site. In doing vertical foot candles, horizontal foot candles, that's between you and the owner, if you're designing to IES criteria or not. All community really worries about is if you are impacting your neighbor. What this ordinance is about is impact on your neighbor. Okay? It is not saying you have to light well, because some of the communities have said you have to meet IES criteria. The problem is the person who decides not to light, and they've got a sidewalk, and if a community says you've got to meet IES criteria, you may actually be increasing the amount of sky glow by forcing someone who says, I don't want to light my sidewalk or parking lot. I'm closed at night. I'm going to turn off all the lights. And so that's why I think it's very important that everyone realizes this criteria is for impact on neighbors. Now, if you want to meet the horizontal foot candles or vertical foot candles, as a responsible designer, we have given you enough lumens to do that. Okay, that's the lumen allowance. We've given enough lumens to do that, but now you need to really be careful on the shielding of the luminaires that you have. I hope I answered that. Any other questions? Microphone.
One of the advantages of lighting like LPS lighting is that it's such a narrow band, it can be relatively easily filtered out by astronomers. Is there any provision in the MLO for restricting the spectrum of lighting use?
We have not restricted the spectrum of lighting use in the MLO, no. That is one area, and I'm really glad you brought that up. We have not touched that. We were way down the road in the model lighting ordinance when the issue of lamp spectra distribution came up, and the IDA position paper on blue rich light, which is basically suggesting, highly recommending, minimizing light below 500 nanometers. That's a separate document. What you will see coming out, again, IDA's position paper is out there. IES has a document called TM12, which is mesopic lighting. And in TM12, it's going to be putting in lumen effectiveness multipliers or an adjustment factor for mesopic lighting. There's also going to be a chapter in it on the environmental impact of spectral distribution. That's probably going to be the first document that will actually, again, going back to IES documents, will talk about the impact of short wavelength light. But no, this does not address that. Good question.
Would everybody make sure to speak into the microphone so our online...
This is a performance microphone, so the closer to your mouth, the better.
Yeah, it's got to be. You got to feel like a rock star then.
Yeah.
Nancy, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I have a question on, it might have been the third or fourth slide. It showed pictures of street lights or parking lot lighting where one of them showed that 250 watt full cutoff would only be allowed in lighting zone 3 and 4. Is it possible to bring that slide back up?
It is slide.
There you go.
There?
Yeah.
It's slide number 20 for
Okay.
the folks in.
My question is, with regards to parking lot lighting, does this suggest that 400 watt lights, and in some cases even 1,000 watt lights, will now be disallowed pretty much everywhere?
400 watt lights and 1,000 watt lights, it will be very difficult to use if you use the bug rating. If you can get it to work with the offside impact, option B, which is total lumens leaving the site and maximum line of sight illuminance on the box, you still use those, but you have to get it to work, which would mean they have to be way into the center of the site and not close to the perimeter at all and fully shielded. It will be very difficult to use them. And no, they would not meet the bug rating, at least 1,000 watt. And we did go through that early on and found out that no 1,000 watt luminaire will meet even bug 4.
Thank you.
Actually, Nancy, this is a follow-up to that. I'm imagining a scenario where a business owner hires a designer or the general contractor comes up with a set of lighting luminaires for their situation. And the building owner wants more light. the designer says, no, you have to have 175s instead of 250 in order to meet the bug criteria. And so the designer comes and goes, and then the building owner says to the general contractor, use the same fixture, but put in 250s. I know that the MLO as drafted doesn't really say anything about enforcement, but in reality, enforcement has been a problem for all lighting ordinances, not just this one. How can we use bug in a way that makes it easy for a simple-minded enforcement officer, your typical building inspector, to see whether or not the correct fixture has been installed according to the lighting design? I'm thinking, for example, street lights have a number on the underside that tells you what the wattage is. Could we ask the lighting industry to put the 3-digit bug rating on the underside of that luminaire so that on simple visual inspection you would know what the fixture is, what the bug rating of the fixture is that you've installed? I think that would make enforcement a whole lot easier, because one of the criticisms I think that bug has had is that it's hard to know what you've got. Once it's out of the box, how do you know what's being thrown up on the pole?
Right. I think that's an excellent idea, and I would say some creative manufacturers could actually promote that they do have bug ratings, posted on their pole some way. Kind of like when you change out a light bulb, it's a maximum wattage rating, and it could be inside the luminaire or whatever to do that. Back to the education of lighting planners, I think there's huge education on what full cutoff meant, and that even if you had a full cutoff luminaire and it was tipped up, now it's a floodlight, that they go, well, it was full cutoff, but again, say, no, it needs to be installed as flat. It's the same type of education, and I do think that, between the luminaire manufacturers helping out with the bug ratings and what it means, some examples like what we've done, maybe a full typical catalog of different lamp wattages and what to expect with bug ratings, and diagrams. Same thing as what we had to go through with full cutoff, because what we're noticing here, it is more complicated than full cutoff, but it's more restrictive than full cutoff, and that's where I think we're hoping to go, but it is going to take some learning, of what that is. So any suggestions would be great on how to do it, because the transition, whenever you move from one system to another, we have some learning curves to go through. Yeah.
Right up close, and it echoes. Does that go good?
Yeah, it's good.
First of all, I have to say that this is a great improvement over one. Really substantial progress. This is not to say I think we're in the right place yet, but it's a big improvement. I thought I would pick up on a couple of other comments. The lady over here who was talking about the need to educate as to what is the appropriate lighting zone. And it just, as she was talking, simple thought occurred to me was the way this is written currently, the term is default. You say this is the default,
right,
or whatever. That's a term that I think is kind of a techie, scientific term. How about just recommended? This is the recommended zone. I think that conveys much more strongly that this is what we would like to see.
I think that's an excellent idea. And I hope someone's recording these comments. We are. In other words, it's, good. It's not only written, but also we're taping this, and so it'll be good. Great idea.
I had a couple of other points. One is I noticed that the bug ratings in, I guess it's table C, most of them are higher than they were in version 1. And I just was curious why those changes were made.
The changes were specific not, because it's the backlight low that was so governed into the backlight limits that we were not allowing, everyone kept thinking the backlight was equal to glare, and it's not. But as the backlight limits, when we went through some typical luminaires, we realized that they were not working. And so that's what was increased, was the backlight. The U actually went down, or I think the U was the same and the G was the same, but the backlight limits were different. The other thing that we did in this version, which was not in version 1, we had assumed that most of the bug rating luminaires are going to be in poles. You know, where the backlight's next to the property line and all the good light goes towards the property line. All of a sudden it was one of these oh duh moments where what if we have a wall sconce on a building that a public sidewalk is right next to it? Well, there's no backlight because it's hitting the building. And so all of a sudden we had to go, oh, now it's the glare rating that is the important. So we've got now an expanded table at the bottom that says if your luminaire is facing the parking lot or property line, now your backlight, we're putting in glare ratings instead. So that was something else that we were just needed to work over and over and over again with the bug rating. So yes, there was some adjustment. And please look at the U ratings and the G ratings. They should not have gone up. I think it's the backlight ratings that went up. Yeah, and that's the reason why. Because of the backlight low. It wasn't the glare rating. It wasn't the higher level light. It was the backlight down near the pole. We just couldn't get it to work. We were way too strict. We couldn't get anything to work, even a little tiny bollard to work near a property line. So we had to relax that.
I also, it was kind of a minor question, but when you're doing, I forget which method it is, but you have hardscape area, you calculate the square feet of hardscape, and then also the perimeter. I don't understand why you do both. I mean, aren't you kind of getting at the same thing?
A lot of people have asked that question, and why do you do the perimeter linear footage? It is for a lot or for an area that has very little hardscape on it, but what hardscape it has on it are sidewalks or pathways through a park. What you'll notice, a pathway with landscape on either side has very little hardscape area, but it's almost impossible to light. It's lit so inefficiently because the poles up here, only some light hits the hardscape. Most of it goes behind it and in front of it. So we did, again, more examples, and we couldn't get enough light with just hardscape area. The linear square footage effectiveness goes way down the fatter your lot is. You know, the bigger and square the parking lot is, you get very little light from the perimeter. But the more skinny, narrow, more sidewalks, pathways, the perimeter actually gives you that push in more light for that. But that's why we added it for, again, that unique lot where you can't get the prescriptive to work, and that was our outlier. But that's why it's there.
Okay. Finally,
talking to the microphone.
Two sort of related points. I think Chris was suggesting trying to do some computer simulations of what a different, if I understood him, a B1 versus a B2 or something looks like. I don't know, that might be helpful because I still come back to the basic issue of how is a town board or town planning department supposed to grasp what does this look like with X lumens per square foot?
Yeah.
How does it relate to, a foot candle measurement? I think some examples of how that would translate would be helpful. But still come back to the very basic question that I put to you when we spoke back in January or whenever it was. What does a, B3 look like?
Right.
Or how do you describe it? What does a B2 rating mean?
Right.
What does it mean?
Right.
Can you tell me? It can't be described.
Seems to me. And I agree with you. And what I think we need to do is to do examples. To have a chart of every possible luminaire you can think of, and to actually show of what B2 actually means. What it is, B1 and B0 is really tight light. You are just not getting any light on the property line. It is all the lights basically going in one direction. B2 is allowing some light, like a typical type 3 luminaire, with the bat wings. B3 and B4, now we're getting into more of the type 5, a symmetrical distribution. But that all changes depending on your lamp wattage. The lower the lamp wattage, you put out less light. The higher the lamp wattage, even a really good fully shielded light is still going to have more backlight than allowed. So it's kind of a multi-dimensional chart. It's just not, okay, you add a shielding to it, and this is what it's going to do. But I agree. Pete is starting on this matrix of looking at different types of light. What I would love to do is to take like Bob Creelan's lights, his typical lights that's on the IDA website, go through every one of those lights, different wattages, and to show this light that we're all familiar with, his sketches, different wattages. Here are some typical B, U, and G ratings for those, and to do like a real visual application that every planning department can use to get an idea. Beyond that, it's a new concept. And I know you and I have talked about this whole thing, and it is a new concept. And I'm hoping that even this helped. I mean, taking this and expanding it a lot more on not only the good stuff, which is what we did in the other 2 slides, or other 3 slides, and full cutoff types of stuff. Go to the luminaires that we have mostly found offensive in our communities, the droplets, cobra heads. Go and really work on what are these, because in my mind, those are the ones that would be the first attack, to get rid of the non-shielded lights. So that I agree with you. We need more education, absolutely, and we need more illustrations and what they are, and lights to help the planning department. Maybe it's a 3D thing. I don't think so. It could just be a chart with pictures, typical lamp wattages, and here's what the bug rating would be for that.
Of course, I also think we need to get rid of the cross-the-board uplight, but I think that's a discussion for this afternoon, probably, rather than
Across the board of what?
Uplight.
uplight.
Are we at break?
Thank you for your patience. We all took a needed break and got coffee. I have no idea where the coffee came from, but I didn't get any.
What would you like?
That's okay.
What would you like?
Black. Just black. Thanks, Kelly. Okay, question from webinar land.
Okay, backlight rating of B3 greater than.
Okay, there we go.
Backlight rating of B3 greater than 2 mounting heights from the boundary in lighting zone 1 seems to eliminate type 5 lights. I don't know if that's a typo, or he means type 4 lights, even in the lot interior for such a zone. There's no orientation requirement, so that backlight seems irrelevant. What's the rationale?
Basically, if you look at, and it's going to take me a minute, I wish I had seen that question ahead of time.
Is your speaker on? Is your mic on?
Is my mic on?
unmute.
Okay, there we go, thank you. If you look at, I know where it is. It's in TM15 that talks about if you have a type 5 luminaire and how it's rated. And tell the person that we will get back to them on exactly where that is. I need to look at TM15. There is a footnote. Oh, you have TM15? Yeah. Is it the addendum? Luckily, somebody's got TM15. Excellent. Thank you.
It's not necessarily
the whole thing. Oh, here we go. In TM15, I found the definition of it. There is a glare rating with a backlight rating for symmetrical luminaires, such as type 5 and type 5G, square. And in there, it basically is saying that your glare rating is going to be the same as the glare ratings for a type 3. So basically, when your backlight issue, when you're back into the parking lot or the area, it's the glare rating that actually determines most of the determination. And so what this is telling me, we need an example showing that when you are in the middle of a parking lot, how the backlight B4 actually is not the determining factor at that point. We have a PowerPoint that goes through that we used for the task force, and it goes through all the different situations and how the B values were actually determined. And we could make that available to in our education material. So it's a great question, and yes, we will have to address it another time and show an example for it. But it was looked at. Thank you, Kelly. Another question.
Hi, Nancy. This is Chris Liverville. I apologize. I was in another meeting during your main presentation, so the questions I asked may already, or the point I made or raised, the question I asked may have already been addressed, and I apologize if that's so. I have a comment which I'd like your response to, and then a question. The first comment just refers to the photometric approach of the MLO, using the bug ratings and the zones, the lighting zones, which we have in this code. In the last 25 years of my experience with lighting codes, photometric information has by far and away been the most complicated and difficult aspect in terms of interpretation, application, and enforcement. People who actually deal with lighting codes on a daily basis in the communities I have experience with have had enormous difficulty with what I might call the previous generation of photometric information which was required. And that was much simpler. It was usually basically based on full shielding or not fully shielded. In other words, it's a binary decision. Is there uplight or is there not uplight? That has proved enormously difficult in the real world of lighting codes on the ground. The current MLO is going to replace that with a BUG rating, so 3 photometric values based on, I believe it's 12 different zones, downward, upward, forward, and backward, split into various subzones. And apply that in 5 different zones, which I think multiplies out to 15 different potentially photometric quantities, which are going to be part of the code. And I think that is likely to be an enormous stumbling block for the practical application of codes, given the resources that communities generally have applied to adopting and implementing codes. So I'll stop with that comment and see if you have a response to it.
What the response is that we did talk about earlier in the education aspect to city planners, in probably having a matrix to show of all fully shielded lights that they're used to seeing, and to see the differences in the light source in them and how that affects what kind of zone you are allowed in. And we did have some slides that showed the different lighting zones and what the wattages would be typical for those lighting zones. depending on if you're close to the property line or not close to the property line, yes, it's going to need education. In fact, I commented on your lamp lumen chart that you have published on the web. I use that all the time. And in fact, all of my examples use your lumens that you put in that chart. Education like that. Here's what initial lumens is. Mean lumens, if you're getting an application that shows mean lumens, that's not right. And I would love something else like that just for typical bug ratings. Because in our chart, and we can go back to and I'm going back to this particular slide right here, that notice that these are all full cutoff luminaires.
Slide 21.
Slide 21, that actually looks at what is allowed, whether you're close to the property line or not. And then slide 22, going lighting zone 2, again, all full cutoff luminaires, but the differences between them. I would anticipate an expansion of this. And again, I mentioned Bob Creelan in using maybe his typical luminaires, the good and the bad, to really show what is allowable or what is not. And then going back to some common luminaires, the 250 watt full cutoff luminaire, what's allowed in different zones, etc. We need this in order to move to a new system. You're right, fully shielded. And the abuse of fully shielded, that you take fully shielded and tilt it up, to really go, no, you need them pointed down, and to go through some simple education of that.
Yeah, proper orientation is an issue with whatever kind of a standard you've established for
exactly.
Controlling the direction of light. Just one minor comment before I go to my question, and that is that you gave examples there of about 15 fixtures with their bug ratings attached to them. For the lighting code to work, we're going to have that expanded to tens of thousands of products. And you know that on a, let's say, conservatively on a monthly basis, probably 10% of those are changing in terms of their availability or new products being added. It's a dynamic environment out there, particularly in LED fixtures, but even in HID fixtures. It's a complex, many-legged and moving target out there that we're trying to maintain complete photometry for, so that people can interpret whether or not they're acceptable under the bug system or the MLO system. And I think you're saying that it's a huge education hurdle for us to place before us.
It is, and what I'm hoping that the education will show by moving away from percentage of lumens per luminaire or per lamp to absolute lumens is going to really help the cause, both in trespass, sky glow, everything. To start thinking about absolute. In fact, what I'm hoping is that all photometry moves away from relative photometry to absolute photometry, and then it'll be simpler for everyone. Then every luminaire that you have will be absolute photometer, and we're not kind of using initial lamp lumens as to make it simple for the planning department.
I have the same hopes, but I also realize that I have today and tomorrow enforcement and application issues that I need to deal with the tools that are available. I want to go to a question which has a little background to it. You mentioned that the bug ratings, you didn't mention explicitly when I was here, but I assume also the lumens per square foot values that are limited for the various applications were determined or were benchmarked, I would say, or were compared with, after careful consideration of lighting amounts as recommended by IESNA recommended practices, to make sure that the amount of light that you're allowing in the MLO is consistent with recommended practice.
Yes.
I think that's a laudable effort, and I've been aware of that effort for at least 4 to 6 years that have been part of the MLO process. I am concerned, however, that this is IDA, which is the Dark Sky Association, as a leading agency, I believe, on the MLO. In any case, it is a participating agency. And I'm concerned that we haven't answered the question of whether or not this addresses dark sky concerns. In other words, while you can generally qualitatively make the argument, and it's indisputable, that shielding a fixture and lowering the amount of uplight allowed is got to be moving in the right direction for reducing light pollution, which the Dark Sky Association is primarily concerned with. We haven't made the case or carefully compared the amount of light and the amount of uplight that is allowed by the structure they're building with MLO. We haven't compared that with what is currently out there, not recommended practice, but real on-the-ground practice. And you know the difference between the two because you did the California study. It shows that there's a lot of difference between what's really out there and what recommended practices might say. We don't know, I don't believe, whether or not this MLO, lighting done to the MLO recommendations or limits, is going to reduce light pollution or not. And further, in 2005, there was a motion made that the IDA ought to, more than ought to, must benchmark the lighting allowed by MLO and compare it against the amount of light that's out there in terms of everyday practice nowadays, and as well compare it to the amount of light that's out there under other kinds of lighting codes which already exist, to see if we're moving forward for dark sky principles as well as allowing light sufficient to IESNA recommended practices. So my question is there any intention or plan to try to determine whether the MLO lighting done to MLO standards, will further IDA's goals of preserving and protecting the nighttime environment?
Well, you make several really, really good points. First thing is the amount of shielding. And what I do believe that the model lighting ordinance is going to limit shielding a lot better than I think some other ordinances have. Just because of this particular example, that a lot of the luminaires I think that are targeted right now are going to be the drop lens cobra heads, the wall packs, and the floodlights, and the barn lights are kind of the three that I have heard as the number one target. If we can reach the goal of higher shielding, and again, uplight, and I know that discussion is going to be this afternoon, and I'm really curious to hear about the position on the uplight, and also the position on RU values, including 80 to 90 degrees below the horizontal. Is that important? Are we putting too much weight upon it? Should we be using just uplight and not considering that uplight also includes 80 to 90 degrees? Those are the refinements I think we as an association needs to really dig into. Is it more important direct uplight, or is it from 80 degrees or high angle light, the glare light? So that's number one. That we are reducing, at least in critical zones, that amount of light in 80 to 90 degrees, which hasn't been done just with fully shielded lights. The amount of light, you mentioned meeting IES criteria and being able to do lighting specifically. An earlier question that came over the internet was, how can we, as a lighting designer, guarantee horizontal foot candles, vertical foot candles, all that? What I think that the model lighting ordinance does is not guarantee good lighting at all, that you meet IES criteria. It only addresses the impact outside, which is going to be sky glow and light trespass. That's the focus of the model lighting ordinance. You don't have to light. You don't have to put any light in, which is exactly what we found in California. Most people don't light, and we didn't want to force that to meet the IES. But if you do need to meet criteria, we wanted to make sure we gave you enough lumens to meet criteria. And it's not all criteria, it is specific lighting zone criteria. So going back to, are we reducing the amount of sky glow? It depends on the lighting zones that the communities select. That the lower the lighting zone, the less sky glow they're going to do. Shielding and high glare is going to be more controlled because it's absolute light. It's not just 1,000-watt light fully shielded in Luminaire. I'm hoping that by instigating getting rid of the glare bombs, that we will have done a lot. What I liked what you did in Flagstaff, Chris, was to go through and inventory every single light in a community. That'd be awesome to do. Or to go and measure where the lighting is in the sky glow in a community now, and then after the MLO is instigated, to go back and get some real data, benchmarking on where it is in the future. And that's where I think IDA could definitely do. And to run some models, like you said. If we went through, benchmarked where all the lights are right now, how many wall packs, how many offending lights there are in a community, and if they were replaced, and encourage amortization, which a lot of communities are really afraid of. So it's a big question, but I know I didn't answer completely. Where are we going? That's up to Router. No. It's an IDA board situation, because I know you were asked to go through and benchmark the MLO.
Yeah, thank you for your response. I think the phrase trust but verify comes to mind. I believe that many of these things in the MLO are indeed improvements, but I can't erase the balance without more study. And I'm disturbed that the board actually backed away from and rescinded that requirement for the dark, what we call the dark sky benchmarking. So presently we're not under any obligation, and I'm not sure I see any particular impetus toward doing such a dark sky benchmarking before the MLO moves forward. And I think it's important. So I'll hand it to Jeff.
I have a comment, maybe a question to Chris's comment. I think you brought up a good point, Nancy, where the MLO is basically concerned about the outside or the offsite impact of what we're doing, which is a domain that IESNA doesn't cover at all. It just covers what's in your property, in your lots. And Chris, I think there's a fundamental difference between IESNA, RPs, and MLO, as IESNA recommends a minimum that you should be doing onto your property so that you can provide visibility. MLO is geared at a maximum. So now the maximum has become the minimum. So I believe that's a connecting point between the IESNA universe and the MLO universe that is fundamentally different. Because people, or the public, was abusing of their freedom to use light because it was cheap and available, and they put more light. And now I think with MLO, we're looking at a maximum, suggesting that the minimum is better instead of proposing a minimum and letting people say you can use more, or if you can afford more, go for it. So I think there's a fundamental difference between the two, and I see a drive as people start competing within the MLO confine to do better, because the numbers are driving toward better use instead of more use. So that's why I see there's a lot of hope in the MLO as a practitioner. Now my question to you, Nancy, is on the decorative side of things. You said we need a permit for decorative lighting, and I may have a comment on the fact that decorative lighting sometimes is perceived as we don't want to confuse a beautiful luminaire and a decorative luminaire. And people, there's some beautiful rotary luminaires. Not because they're beautiful, they should be banned. So we need to make sure that we are for good lighting, but we also are for good architectural integration. And I'm afraid the word decorative lighting may be confusing for people. So I may comment about maybe using ornamental lighting, which is lighting just for the sake of ornamenting in regards to functional or decorative functional lighting.
We argued for a week on that term and the definition. Any suggestions would be really welcome. I mean, you should have heard Leo's elaborate definition of decorative lighting, Naomi Miller, and they went back and forth. So, yes, suggestions. We want to make sure it's understandable and that it is what people expect. What we're looking at, this decorative street lighting, as it's called right now, is in urban areas, downtown areas, where a lot of people will put in well-designed luminaires, but they happen to have a drop lens in them. They are not a 100%, full cut-off uplight. And it was actually Leo and Denis that came up with the U values for that you can't just have a non-controlled decorative light. It still has to meet uplight restrictions. So, yes, that again is, we'd love some comment back on that. Be excellent. Let's see, Kelly's next, and then Gail.
Yeah,
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, who's ever got the talking stick? It's the microphone.
So I want to go back to a moment to the zone recommendations according to what is actually happening in the zones. Where do mixed models fit into this? In the sense of inner city housing, where you often have government housing, if you will, low socioeconomic status residents. It could be adjacent to a gas station, for instance. So where would they fit in within the IDA structure right now from an MLO?
Right now, where I would imagine that they would go in is light zone 2. And your gas station could be light zone 2 also. What I've noticed a lot of municipalities have done is that you have to use the most restrictive zone if you're adjacent to it. So if you're light zone 3, but you're next to light zone 2, you have to light towards light zone 2, at least the outside impacts.
Okay, so then that also helps with my earlier question about buffer zones. I didn't realize that. So that if you're wanting to be a zone 3, but you're adjacent to a zone 2 or a zone 0,
yes,
perhaps, you've got to mitigate
right.
that.
And again, that is per municipality, and it's their own area. But the different municipalities I've worked with, that's common in all their zoning, like sound or amount of landscape. If you're bordering, you have to border towards the more restrictive zone throughout. So we're leaving their existing language in there on how to handle it, but that's typically how it's done.
And then just a short question for my own clarification. The path that we're looking right now to make this into an official policy, I know that we're working on a national level, trying to get something done nationally. Is this right now, what I'm thinking is that if a community wants to adopt the MLO, once it's finalized, it's going to just be their option.
Right,
but,
yes.
And how are we going
yes.
about informing them of this document once it's done?
Good question.
We're not there.
Yeah, we're not there yet. First, we need to feel comfortable that this is it. But again, like you and I talked about, or you and I talked about webinars, and to go through and say, if you can go through this menu of choices in it, and you decide you're a lighting zone 1 community, that's the only thing you're going to put into your ordinance is lighting zone 1. And you may say, and we are only going to be prescriptive, lighting zone 1, period. Everything else may be special permit. And if you come in with special permit, then the planning department, they've got the performance method sitting there and saying, okay, special permit, here's what you need to do for special permit. And not even put in their light, or say, no, we're not allowing it. You got to be lighting zone 1 prescriptive, period. You can't have aimable lights, you can't do anything, you've got to be, that's up to the municipality.
And I'm guessing this is possible, although I know it doesn't currently exist, if we would be able to give communities who do choose to partake in this some type of guideline where if they started out as a zone 2, wanted to drop to a zone 1, what type of cost they may be looking at that? It's a large factor with citizens and then therefore policymakers. What type of cost burden is this going to be if we want to shift to this type of lighting? So does that mean replacing our fixtures? If so, can you help give numbers for that?
What I think we should be encouraging communities is to start low. You can always go high. It's really hard to take light away.
Right. Well, but a lot of our communities are already high. That's the thing, when we look at light pollution projections now, when you're in a protected area, hopefully your gateway communities are low. But then as we move out, and especially metropolitan areas and surrounding suburban areas, they're already high. So if we're looking to reduce light pollution, then we may bring them in at a high level. But then I would hope the idea would be to encourage them to drop that.
Actually, I would still bring them in as a low level. And then absolutely insist on amortization. And some states now have said you can no longer amortize. I know Alaska is that way, and they're fighting it. Amortization, I know City of Boulder uses the depreciation tables from IRS in saying after X amount of years, your equipment isn't worth anything. So that's the point when you have to change out your lighting, or if you do anything substantial to the lighting, you have to change out everything. So again, that I know communities are dealing with that with billboards and poor landscape lighting or landscape areas that they have built into how do they beautify their city and what the process is. And so the lighting ordinance should do the same thing. But I wouldn't start off high in the lighting zones. I go to what is your goal? And to go with that type of lighting zone. And just like like Kelly brought up, parking lots are really well designed under lower lighting levels. As long as you get rid of the glare and everything, you can see perfectly under it. But it's a matter of designing and encouraging the new installations to do that.
Okay, so I may have misunderstood then. I was under the impression that when a community came in under MLO, it was at their current standard. So what we're doing then is trying to have them come in where they would like to be. Is that
absolutely?
Okay, that makes sense.
It definitely, that's my personal opinion. It's where they eventually want to go.
Okay, right.
Yeah, this kind of coattails on something that Chris said. I think that what the IDA's membership is looking for is an MLO that will not just keep things at the status quo, but in the long term reduce light pollution. Right. I saw a comment, and I'm trying to remember who made it, that with the first draft, if all communities lit to the levels of the first draft, there would be lighting zone creep. That is, a lighting zone 2 would become a 3, and a 3 would become a 4 over time because the levels were too generous. And I think what the membership is looking for from us, and we in turn from the task force, is an MLO that will reduce light pollution over time. And I know that's been your goal, but to Chris's point, we need to be able to prove that somehow. And I'm not sure, I'm not enough up on this to tell you how we would go about that. But we need to be able to say, if a community took out all the lights that they now have and replaced them with MLO levels, the amount of light pollution would be X compared to what it is now, be it higher or lower. And I'm not sure that we're there yet. The sort of corollary to that is, and I brought this up in the meeting, we really need to make the street lighting an integral part and not just an optional part, because the numbers I've heard is the street lighting accounts for roughly 1/3 of all light pollution. That's the biggest single source. It's not the big box stores that happen to have some wall packs or the mom and pops, however many there may be. It's sort of an insidious form of light pollution. And so I think I really would like to see the street lights be an integral part. And my final point is that in your response to some parking lots are different than others. A hospital might need a higher level than a library. Let's make the library level the standard. And if the hospital wants to light to a higher level, let them get a special permit. I think the lowest level should be our goal, and allow, through special permit or whatever else you want to do, allow a higher level under closer scrutiny than the basic MLO level. Thank you.
I think those are great points. And where I would suggest a community doing that is maybe going with a very low light zone, and everything that doesn't need it goes under special permit.
Nancy, could I make a comment?
You're going to need, no, Gail's got the talking stick.
To his question?
And then I have
Possession is the contents of the law.
Yeah, and just hold on to that, Leo, and then, okay, you can comment.
I actually wanted to pick up on something Kelly said also, and that is one of the ideas that I think keeps getting lost in the shuffle is what we're talking about here is a model. This is not anybody's real world legislation or ordinance.
Right.
The adopting community always has the option, if they think we need more for the hospital versus the train station, or whatever the example was that Kelly got, they have that option. But the MLO should not be written in case somebody, the standards of the MLO set should not be written in case there is a situation where a community might want, more light or, looser, whatever. This isn't a real law. This is a compendium of suggestions that the adopting community is free to change. And I think a lot of the problem that we're having arises from losing sight of that distinction.
Right. I want to respond a little bit to that. What I have heard from many municipalities is that the normal stuff is easy for them to deal with. What's really, really hard to deal with is the odd application. And because they're not lighting people, they have no idea how to evaluate it. So where the MLO is, I think we should give them some guidance in those odd applications how to deal with it. One example, like the ice rink, situation where they want to light an ice rink in a small community that wasn't used to any lighting. They're going, oh my gosh, how do we even begin to evaluate it? So that's what I'm hoping the MLO is in the performance method, is to give them at least a way of evaluating a real difficult situation. And again, through the education, say, most of the time, you will never ever need the performance method. It's only for the ones that cannot meet it, that here's some guidance on how to deal with those odd sites, but not to say that should be the default or the recommended method that you would use. Leo's next.
This is to respond to Kelly and Chris on first of all, the idea of modeling and testing is wonderful. The only question is, where's the money? Who's going to pay for it? How much does it cost to actually do the kinds of testing that you're talking about? And where's that funding going to come from? That's just a question. On Kelly's comment about street lighting and transferring it from optional, I think it's a very good point. What I would suggest is that in the public comment period, we take a look at the possibility of perhaps at least, if not putting street lighting completely into the MLO as not being optional, at least in terms of looking at what we'll call subdivision regulations, which zoning and planning actually has jurisdiction over. So if some developer buys a farm and he wants to put in a new community, under subdivision regulations, it may very well specify that he must put in street lighting at a certain level. And because that is part of zoning, perhaps we could incorporate street lighting as a subdivision regulation that would be non-optional, because it would be actually part of zoning and planning. Whether or not we can get into the point of, let's say, down the major highway where the city has the existing street lights and those are governed primarily by the Public Works Department, but that even Public Works is working directly under the auspices of the town council. That might be more of an optional thing, because if the zoning and planning department adopts the model lighting ordinance, they can't really adopt something that requires a department outside their jurisdiction to do something.
But let them take that out.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, let's make it the default.
Okay, go, because we really want people on the webinar to hear
My
all these
quick follow-up
comments.
is let's force those communities to take that out and make it, if they don't think that it's going to work with their public works department, that's their option. But I think our model, our default, ought to be that street lighting is going to have to be controlled. Period.
And what I would recommend is put that in the public comments, because the more comments we get, the difference is, we do have another association, and I must say that many of their members in the task force were hoping that we would have a separate ordinance for street lighting and not include it even as an option in this one. And so it's out of all the issues, that and of course the bug ratings and the education and what does it mean and the street lighting option and are the big hot buttons, and then like what somebody mentioned, what about lamp spectrum distribution? Is that going to be in the model lighting ordinance? These to me are areas, or are lumen allowances too high and we're allowing too much light. We're doing light loss factors and everything else that can meet IES documents. These are issues that we would love for you guys to model, to give us some feedback on, to test out on are we too high? Because like I mentioned, one of the IES board members said, your car dealership lumen allowances are way too high. And it's something we are now going to do more modeling. So please give those comments in. That's what the public process is about. Chat.
Does lighting zone 4 adhere to ASHRAE 90.1 energy efficiency standards given typical conversions between watts and lumens?
I know it adheres to Title 24 energy units. I have heard now that in car dealerships only, that ASHRAE is tighter than Title 24. And we are now doing an evaluation for Title 24 in lowering those limits. One proposal that we had put out as a task force was to lower all the limits by 15%. And we didn't have enough time to go through and vet that against the IES documents. But this is something that, yes, if that is a public comment, we definitely, we'll address what the IES board member said too, that we can't meet ASHRAE with, especially light zone 4. Right. So yes, no, I'm fully aware of it, specifically for car dealerships, that they have lowered their lighting levels from one of the 50-foot candles front row. I think that they have lowered an ASHRAE down to 30-foot candles. Now, don't quote me, but it's something along those trends that their mapping that Michael Lane did was a lower illuminance level in car dealerships specifically.
Okay. I think one of the comments that I've seen from others and one of the concerns I have myself, and a lot of this can be solved in how you define your zones, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. But, if IDAs approves this document and name goes on it, that means that lighting zone 4 is essentially approved by the IDA. And, most of us aren't comfortable with IDA saying a drop lens Cobra, 150 watt, 175 watt is okay. And I think we need to be really careful of that, and this is just sort of an ethic. If this does go forward, and we do still include a lighting zone 4, we need to say right up front, hey, this is not dark sky friendly lighting. Don't think in any way we think you should be here. I think that's an important statement, because our job in the IDA is advocacy for dark sky, and I realize this is a compromise document. We're trying to affect social change, and I appreciate the compromises and the long-term strategy that goes into this document. But I don't want to be put in a position as someone who talks to communities of someone coming back to me saying, hey, it's IDA approved, 175 watt drop lens Cobra. If it's good enough for IDA, why is it not good enough for you? It makes me look like a left-wing nut.
Right. No.
So, just not that far. So, Billy, I'm going to get you after this. And the last thing I wanted to say is being involved with discussions of colleagues about this. There's so much conjecture as to some of the points that were brought up. Is this going to be better for us than what we currently have and worse for us? And I realized the task force has gone through, and like the slide we're looking at right now, which is the key slide, we've translated what we know, what we feel in our gut, as good lighting, bad lighting, into the MLO. It allows us to sort of gauge the bug system. But until Pete and whoever else is working on the matrix that gives us at least 30, 50 fixtures with bug ratings, I don't think we can really evaluate it. And I would suggest that of the 60-day comment period, there's at least 30 days where this document, this additional addendum is available for us to adequately respond. Because I'm going through a lot of my comments in my head, and I'm bumping up against, I want to know where this fixture fits. And I because your comment audience is so technically savvy, they're going to want to sort of do this for themselves, at least in the cerebral gut way.
I totally agree.
So there's no,
I couldn't agree more than that. In fact, what we vetted this through Anchorage. There is a community that has been looking at this model lighting ordinance, all the different versions, going through it as a alpha test site. And they have gone out and done site measurements of existing sites where their planning department and local IES section has said, this we think is good lighting. I mean, everyone goes, yeah, this really nice church parking lot, fully shielded, it looks great. Yeah, it's next to residential. Okay, a little too high in the property lines. They've gone through and measured, evaluated, and then have gone to see if they could meet what they thought would be a lighting zone 2, whatever. And actually, some of their comments back, like the backlight issue, has been a result of them going out and trying to vet this whole document. It's been very, very valuable. They actually submitted and went through their community to all the engineers and mostly the engineers. What are the typical luminaires you use? Or the catalog number, the lamp wattage, blah, 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 at different sites. And they gathered this, and we did an entire bug rating system and looked at the lighting zones for them. And what that did is that stuff that they were familiar with, the luminaires, they got bug ratings back and learned of what it could be and what lighting zone or not. That's what Anchorage went through. Maybe this is something what IDA members do and IES members. Send in your lights, your favorite lights. You say, this light I feel would be appropriate for lighting zone 1, but I'm not sure. Or this light is outrageous. I hope you never allow it anywhere. Hopefully, it'll get back the results like that. And I think that would be very, very valuable. But yes, step 1, to go through and do the matrix, the big matrix of more lights, more bug ratings. But if you have some favorites, give them to Pete, so that instead of him guessing at what he needs, that would be awesome to do. Because I agree. We had to do that to feel comfortable with the ratings. And so Pete, I kind of heard him say he knows what he's going to be doing for the next month. But it is. I totally agree. I think that this is important. And also different wattages in your favorite luminaire. Sure. Say, I kind of feel that this would be appropriate at a 50 watt, but tell me what that is and what's the 400 watt, and to look at it. And Pete's got all this stuff. Question?
I think this one addresses a lot of the ambiguities. It goes back to decorative lighting.
Okay. And the question is, on decorative lighting, as the IES handbook states, function before form, how much is it going to cost and how much energy does it require compared to non-decorative lighting? Is the light needed to start with? And I think that's something that everybody's been indirectly addressing here.
Decorative lighting. Oh boy, we got to change that name. I know now.
How about unshielded?
Well, it's not even unshielded because it could be super shielded. It could just be like a light that's like a full cutoff, but it happens to have a drop lens in it and gives some uplight. You know, I'm struggling in what is, there's some junk out there. No question about it. Glare bombs. How do we separate the glare bombs from the functional lighting that has a drop lens, but the lamp is up in the reflector? I mean, this is what I'm struggling with. And this is, you know, we've heard a lot of people say, oh, those are okay. But what we don't want are the dropped refractors with the lamps in it. We're struggling as a committee on what do you guys want to allow or not allow? What is it? And what I would encourage you to do is these different decorative lights, a 50 watt inside of a reflector with a drop lens, what's the U rating for that? Chances are it's probably a U2 or U3. Go through the thing, and that's something else Pete can do. On this decorative lighting category, what does that mean? And again, you know, Luminaire can help out quite a bit too in different types of luminaires, because that's something that we have gone through as a design firm and looked at all different Cobra heads, all different wall packs, everything, and recognizing that what is driving a lot of the model lighting ordinance compliance-wise, it's not necessarily the lumens per square foot, it is the shielding in the luminaires, and that's where, and again, this 10% leaving the site. So
and that's a great lead-in for his other question, which is why aren't Baddeley's weighting factors being used for uplight? And that's Chris Baddeley.
Why Baddeley's weighting factors are not used for uplight? Well, we did not do that. We did in the first version. We had a very complicated method for performance that did use the weighting factors for the uplight. What we've done to simplify it, we have taken those out, but we still have 80 to 90, 90 to 100. We've got that separate zone there, and what needs to be changed is what is the position of uplight? And we all know, what is it, 20 times more damaging to the sky glow, or up to 20 times. And again, lamp spectral distribution's in there, and the shorter the wavelength light, there are a lot of issues that, and for those of you who don't know what Baddeley weighting, does everyone know? Okay, no clue, okay. Basically is saying at 80 to 90 and 90 to 100, at the closer you are, that light that goes out horizontally gets caught into the atmosphere and contributes greater to sky glow. I mean, Chris and Chad are the experts at this. I feel like a novice talking about this, and with your models, Chris, on 10 times, 20 times more effective in the sky glow than going straight up into the air. And so that's basically what it is. It's atmospheric scatter, right? And the bluer the light, the more scatter you're going to get, atmospheric. And this is the last year or 2 years ago at this conference, Baddeley gave a presentation. Since then, Chris and Chad have been working so much on this, on what the effect of uplight and different degrees. That's what the bug rating was attempting in a very weak manner, I would say, to separate 90 to 100 degrees and 80 to 90 degrees from just uplight, because in anticipation of a greater factor in sky glow.
In the back.
My name's Paul Klaas. I'm a lawyer from Minneapolis. I don't even know what the word is that starts with a B that you've all been using. So I'm pleased to report that Paddle-E or whatever it is not within my realm. I have it's been a very impressive and interesting morning for me, but I'm not technically savvy. I do have a naive question for you though, which is, I have heard that we don't know from the model code whether the skies will get darker or not. I've heard that we're following the lighting engineer recommendations, and surely that group has different interests than the International Dark Sky Association would. I hear that we've avoided comment on enforcement at all. And I wonder if you could describe really, is there a fundamental judgment that there won't be confrontation from this group with light polluters? And you don't have to be a left-wing nut to think that would be a very unusual pattern for a historical environmental movement, to be completely non-confrontational. But is that judgment? Does those seem to be some of the data points on the way to that judgment? And if so, why was that judgment made?
I don't know if I completely understand your question. I think this is what you said. That the differences between meeting recommended practices, lighting levels, which the engineers have to meet and everything, is that in conflict with the Dark Sky Association's goals? And how is that? I mean, say it again. My whole family's full of lawyers, and my dad's a judge, so I'm really trying to listen well.
A significantly broader and more basic question, I guess, which is there a desire to avoid conflict with either engineering judgments made by people with different interests or municipalities who are perfectly happy to let their car salesmen light up to whatever extent they desire, or other light polluters? In other words, is there a judgment by this association that there will not be confrontation?
There will be confrontation. We are, like JF had mentioned, the recommendations basically say minimum lighting levels or minimum averages, whatever. There's been never a cap on that. There's no maximum. We're pushing that cap down to equal the minimum. And so therefore, if you're in a specific lighting zone, you no longer will be able to light your gas station to the 50, 70-foot candles to attract attention of the customer. You're going to be forced to the 10 to 20-foot candles. That is reasonable to see anything that you need to do at a gas pump or even check your oil. So we are essentially putting a cap on lighting, and therefore I would anticipate some corporate clients or corporate entities, the Car Dealership Association, the Gas Station of America Association, whatever that is, to really question what we're doing, that they can no longer put overly light a gas station in a community. So, no, we knew there'd be confrontation. Would we go all the way, what Chad is suggesting, don't even put lighting zone 4 in? Maybe all the warning we put on it, not a default zone, cannot use it. Or even in the user guide we said, it's not anywhere in California. How much stronger statements do we need to make that this is Times Square, Las Vegas, very unusual areas that no one in California has even bothered to apply for lighting zone 4, that, there's going to be controversial and conflict, no matter what. It's either from the people who want a lot of lighting in the sphere of security and safety to the ones who want to preserve what we once had. And what I would love to do is encourage people to turn off lights and at curfew hours to turn the lights off. In fact, out of anything in this model lighting ordinance that we should be training the planners to do is to actually enforce curfews. and to turn lights off. You're going to see it probably first in California in their energy code. They're going to demand that outdoor lighting not is just circuited to turn off 50% of the light. It does turn off a minimum of 50% of the light. Okay? So this is going to be moving. Maybe the energy codes are going to be ahead of us on this. But I think we need to embrace it and educate the city planners that this is coming, and technology is allowing you to do this, allowing you to turn an entire city, all the street lighting down to any level you want through individual IP addresses and a wireless system. We're installing that now in Anchorage. They're looking at it in San Diego, in San Jose. Cities are going to lower lighting levels at curfews. And this is, I would say, let's pick up at that technology and really push turning lights off. So I don't know if I completely answered, but conflict. We're just at the beginning of the conflict period. J.I.
Well, Nancy, I don't know. We seem to have come out of the question period. We're in the debate period, I guess. It's okay. I don't know if I should hold this for this afternoon, but I can't help it, but I kind of have to react to decorative lighting. And I think one of the challenges we're faced with is we've developed through the MLO a series of bug ratings and limitations and lumens and everything. And we still want to kind of have this layer of decorative lighting over it. But if we did a good job in the bug rating, we don't need to segment the equipment universe, because if it's good looking, post-up, side mount, pendant, you don't care. If it lights the way it's supposed to light in regard to the bug rating, regardless of how I achieve this, shouldn't be a concern to you. It's like a car industry. Let's say you've seen that red cars tend to be noisy and then sportsy looking and they drive fast and everything. So you put a driving code out there and you say, and by the way, I want no red cars. If you've limited speed, if you have limiting switch on cars, if you have noise limits, if you have all that good stuff and that red car behaves the way it should, why should we limit red cars? That's the same analogy. So if the technical domain of the MLO is such that if we're within this, regardless of how it's done, it shouldn't be a matter to you. Now, I know there's some question about enforcement, and I think on the legacy of decorative lighting, it used to be the biggest problem. I think the decorative lighting industry is making strides to really behave in the bug rating universe, and if they do, they should be penalized. So that's my comment on decorative lighting. Now, my comment on interests, I have to react to that because I don't think engineers, I live with them on a daily basis, have any other interest than everybody else's interest, which is safety, the most economical way of lighting things. So to pretend that the engineers are out there promoting more light just for sake of promoting more light would be wrong. And I think we are going to be confrontational if we address this thing on an interest base. We have common interest. We need to cost less money because most public investors right now don't have a lot of money available. So they represent the minimum required to see, and IDA represents the minimum light to coordinate society with the different interests, safety, stargazing, and other issues. So it's a common interest. It's just a different perspective, and that's where I believe it's working together in recognizing that we have different expertise and different domain, that we're going to come to an end. If we get to a confrontational, it's going to take longer. We're going to get there, I think, but it's going to take longer. That's why.
Kelly's next. Then we do have one on the webinar. We're going to grab.
Turn it off.
So you said something that only now is ringing off a bell in my head, which is we're doing this in partnership with the IES. The IES has these RPs out there that specify minimum levels. Are the maximums that we're targeting in the MLO essentially designed to equate with the RP minimums?
It meets the RP minimums.
Okay. Suppose we on the IDA side of this equation think that the RP minimums are too high. Was there parking lots, gas stations, whatever? Where do we go to actually bring to the MLO task force and say, okay, yeah, you've got your RP8, your RP33, whatever. We think those levels are too high, and let's negotiate a new target that in your next RP will become the recommended practice. And so that, I guess that's question/comment.
Well, and going back to my Anchorage situation and implementing the MLO in Anchorage, the engineers up there are actually some of the most fabulous engineers, line designers. They don't over-design. They design, but they do meet IES. They feel very strong that their engineering license and their PE stamp needs to meet recommended practices. So for the MLO, we felt that we needed to be able to meet it. But, and I'm going to go back to this one chart. I think since it was only the second slide, we kind of glazed over it. But with this particular slide, and going back to it in the slideshow, here is our mapping of which RPs we use for different lighting zones. And in RP 20, for instance, parking lots, they do have different lighting levels. And it's like minimum 0.2 horizontal in lighting zone 2, 0.5 minimum lighting zone 3. That is a lot different than what you're seeing at 3-foot candles, 5-foot candles. So there is a mapping. It is designed around minimum. And that's where I'm hoping that we've improved. We've actually put a cap. But yet we're allowing them to meet some kind of RP, IES RP, in order to deal with the liability issue. So that's where we're going. We're going back and forth. But what I would do with lighting zones, you can go, the way to go to a lower lighting level is go to lower lighting zone. Okay, question from the webinar.
And then we should
Then we gotta stop.
close it up. Yeah. The small towns in my area should be LZ1. Can the dark area RP33 station be designed to fit in? And how far would it be from typical brightnesses of present grid stations?
Okay, in RP33, and again I'm doing this from memory, gas stations in RP33 in the lowest lighting zone is about 10-foot candles. 5-foot candles. For low. So therefore the example we used here was 20-foot candles in lighting zone 2. So yeah, it's again what's driving it is the equipment. What lighting zone 1 is so restrictive on is going to be the backlight, especially with very little, small property lines, or property lines near the boundary. That's what I feel is driving in gas stations and car dealerships is going to be the off-site limits, and not necessarily, you can't overlight because then that particular luminaire is putting out too much light and it's not going to meet the glare. And it's the canopy and the glare rating that is the driving force in those particular situations. So what I like about it is that we've got several different checks. It's not just how much light, it's going to be off-site impact, and the closer the parking, the property line, the harder it is to do that. Yeah, I mean, we could do an example. I'm pretty sure you could do a gas station easily, especially at 5-foot candles in lighting zone 1, which would be a great example. To go through the different applications that's going to be in every single community. Homes, gas stations, car dealerships, every community, maybe, but let's try it. And what else? Sports field, hockey rink, football field in a school. Start looking retail. Start looking at drive-up, fast food establishment, whatever, and to go through an example.
Seems like that's a start of a list for educational materials.
Right, you've got to use the microphone, but Leo's got it. He's going to close up, by the way.
Kelly, the point that you made earlier about how if you have enough light in lighting zone 1, why isn't that enough light in lighting zone 3, is something that has bothered me too. If 5-foot candles for the gas station is sufficient in lighting zone 1, why isn't 5-foot candles sufficient in lighting zone 2 and lighting zone 3?
Right.
And it's an extremely valid point. And I think what we're up against is on the other side, because this is a joint document, we're up against all the other RP committees and what they've already put out. And the question of whether we would go our own way and say, okay, it's lighting zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you get 5-foot candles and that's all you get, would be, let's just say, a major disruption within the IES. And politically, there were compromises that were made because this is a joint document. And I think the major thing to keep in mind is that this is a living, breathing document. And we have waited 9 years, and we still don't have the MLO out. And if we continue to say, well, we could do it better, let's hold off, let's not do it, let's wait, let's do it better, we'll never have a document. On the other hand, if we publish a document now, and we agree that it has flaws, it's not perfect, okay? 3 years from now, we will come out with a new document, and we will continue to improve it. And I think that's the way to go. It's not perfect.
So what I would encourage you all to do, and then we'll be done. This has been great. This is better than any public review period I could get for everyone in one room and to talk about these issues. You all bring up really good points from the education point of view, from what it's doing with the IES, to encouraging putting in street lighting into it. Don't let it pull apart, that we need to lower everything. From have we really looked at this or done a due diligence? Are we really going to lower sky glow in the long run over communities? I mean, to go out and map and get communities to start looking at where their sky glow is, maybe a prediction, back to Walker's Law of how many lumens are going up with the sky glow. And if we relit everything per population, what would it be? Putting in spectral distribution, sign ordinances, including all of that. The bug rating, like Gail brought up, onto what does this mean? Do we feel comfortable with it? If a community actually looks at different bug ratings, what does it mean? Yeah, there's a lot of education, but I just want to thank you all for listening through it, giving us a chance to explain it, and great questions. And it is the beginning of our public review process, because everything mentioned here, starting with this webinar, which was taped, will begin to answer some of the questions. So, thank you all. That's it.
Thank you.